Hi, everybody. This is Greg, and this is the Shadow Hour. I'm a paranormal investigator with the Shadow Hunters. And tonight's guests are Emily and Tobias Wayland, who are the head of Singular Fortean Society, which includes investigations. And Tobias is the lead writer, lead investigator. He's been doing this for over 10 years. He's also a very good author, and he has a book called The Lake Michigan Mothman. So with that introduction, that's Emily, that's Tobias, I'm Greg, and let's go. Start it out, please, if you want.
Sure. Well, I mean, thanks so much for having us.
Sure.
We're always happy to be here, obviously. I mean, there's a lot going on. It's hard to know, I guess, where to start with us. I mean, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and talk about what you do? Because you add a lot to this.
Sure.
Yes.
So I would say that I am the creative director and graphic designer, photographer for the Singular Fortean Society. Anything and everything visual is kind of my forte. I do all the graphic design work, our merchandise. I photo document on investigations, and I edit footage and video. And
you do all of the
analysis. That's what I thought about that, and I didn't quite get there yet.
Right. It's important. People love that.
So I do a lot of anything visual, analyzing any footage or video or photos that we get that might be paranormal in nature, to kind of be like, this could be something, or this might not be. And I drew
recognize that. Yeah.
That's your work, right?
Yes.
Okay.
That is a definitely long-term project that I'm doing. I'm trying to make,
for everybody that doesn't understand what this is, that's the Mothman.
As a tarot card.
As a tarot card.
So yeah, that's what I do. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's really invaluable. I like to say that Emily is the reason that I'm not just, ranting somewhere in the internet in green text on a black background somewhere, she's done the entire aesthetic, her ability to, obviously make things look great, but also, add to investigations with her insight about photography. I mean, it's really been, I've learned a lot, frankly. I didn't know much about photography. I knew a little bit about Photoshop, but not nearly as much as Emily. And she's really taught me quite a bit. So just from a pure investigative standpoint, it's pretty impressive what Emily's brought to the table, which is pretty great, honestly. I mean, there's been some interesting, photographs we've examined over the years. Usually it's debunking them, unfortunately, but that's just part of the process.
I always say that the best way to learn how to debunk photographs and, look at paranormal photographs is by learning how to make fake ones on Photoshop. If you understand how the software works and what different effects you can use, as well as looking at a photograph that's been photoshopped, you will be able to pretty much just determine what's going on in any paranormal photograph for the most part.
Sure. Except for the small handful that, occasionally are unexplainable.
And that's as far as we kind of say, it's I can't explain this, but we never definitively say, no, this is for sure Mothman. This is for sure Bigfoot.
Sure. Well, you did your Fortean photography series for a while. I mean, there were a couple in there that I think you really landed on. Hey, I don't know what that is.
It's been a while.
What was probably your favorite?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've done one of those columns, or we used to do a video series as well, focusing our energy on other things now.
Sure.
But there was a couple. One of my favorites is the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall.
I thought you might say that. Yeah.
It's the first one that I've written about, and also the first one we did a video on. It's just a very strong example of a possible paranormal photograph, and it's from 1930s. So if you have never seen that photograph, Google it.
Yeah,
the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall.
It's iconic. I think most people have, if they saw it, even if it doesn't come to mind immediately when you hear the name, once you see the photograph, like you'll recognize it. Everybody's seen it.
Was that taken on the stairway?
Yes.
Yep.
I know which one you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That is quite well done. But I wanted to mention that, I've seen a lot of your photography, and it's awesome. I mean, I really love your nature shots that you really concentrate on a lot.
Yeah, that tends to be my favorite.
What kind of camera are you using?
I'm using a digital SLR, which is single light reflex. Basically, that means you attach the lens to the front of the camera, light comes in, and it bounces the image in.
Right.
In the film days, that would have just been known as a SLR, but DSLR digital. And I use a Nikon D750. I believe the best, for those of you who are always curious about cameras and ask about them, the best camera that you can have is the one that's available to you. And that's my advice. Obviously, I have a DSLR because that is my degree. I do freelance with it. It's part of my full-time job. But if you are an investigator and you are curious about what kind of camera to get, start with your cell phone and, kind of see what else you need to do. And then you can go from there in terms of what equipment you need.
Well, it's pretty impressive. I mean, just cell phone technology, for instance, because like the camera in my Galaxy S10, I mean, it's got like 8 megapixels.
It has more than
that. It's like 14 or something, right?
Yeah, because most cell phones nowadays are 12 megapixels and up, and yours has 14, I believe.
Okay. Yeah. Which, I mean, now again, like Emily knows way more about this than I do, so I'm going to bounce this back to her. But like, that's pretty good resolution, right? That's
pretty good resolution. If you are an investigator and you are interested in camera equipment, start with your cell phone, but I could see you maybe wanting a DSLR if you were considering doing more artful photographs, perhaps some film work that looks a little bit more cinematic, as well as if you were trying to take pictures from far away, then you'd want a camera that can handle a giant lens.
Wow.
But otherwise, a lot of people can get away with their cell phone or something like that, smaller.
Well, that is really, really awesome. And I'm glad that you let everybody know about that, because those things are really, for me, I came back when I was overseas and I came back from the war. I had a camera. Every GI that came back to the United States had a 35 millimeter camera, and some of them had those big telephoto lenses, and and Lord only knows what you did with them. I used to love to shoot night lights.
Yeah.
Like in Hong Kong and places that I was, and just, open up that exposure and just shoot, and just get all those lights at night. It was beautiful. But let's get off that. And
that's that's another great point to bring up. If that's something else you might want to consider, if that's the kind of investigative work you do, what do you need your camera to do? And is your cell phone enough, or do you need more control over the settings?
Right. Well, you've taken some wonderful long exposure shots while we're on investigations.
Yes.
Actually.
Yes. A couple of times, like the moon, if we go out to the Kettle, it's pretty much a full starless sky, no light pollution. And we've been out in the woods when it's been a full moon, and it really lights up the entire forest, but you can see it so clearly out there.
Yeah, she's gotten some really, really lovely sky shots from investigations we've done out in the Kettle, which,
Yeah, a lot of times when you work with a camera and you're looking at the night sky, you can set your camera to see more than your naked eye gets.
Right.
So in off chance I happen to get something weird, it's always worth a try it.
It couldn't hurt. Yeah. I mean, it hasn't turned up anything like that particular style of shot, taking those long exposures. It hasn't turned up anything anomalous yet.
But you never know.
But you do never know. And when you're in an area like that with so much reported activity and so much that we've seen as far as like anomalous lights and stuff, I mean, any shot you can take is worth it.
Exactly.
There's a bunch of people out there right now, and I just want to mention their names, and they're saying hi to you guys.
Oh, great.
Jen Hodgson. You got Danny Botts. Aubrey Patrick Bowen is there.
Hi, Aubrey.
Donna Sharon Moritz, Nadia Kimbrough, and Julie O'Mara Webster.
Well, hello. And thanks for joining us.
Aubrey's one of our society members, which is why we called him out.
That's good. Good. Hey, Aubrey, good to see you, buddy. But let's go ahead and get into a little bit of the real meat and potatoes, like Holy Hill.
Sure.
Your investigation and what went down and everything else.
Yeah, happy to do it. We had become aware of a 2006 sighting of what the witness at the time described as a bear wolf out near Holy Hill. This would have been, was it Troll Hill Road?
Troll Hill Road at Holy Hill Road.
Yeah. And
that's in Washington County. We are in Madison, Wisconsin.
Right.
So Washington County is about an hour east of us.
Right. And, it just so happened that this was a case that Linda Godfrey had investigated, and our friend Jay Bachochin had, he knew the witness himself, and he had investigated it somewhat. And so when we expressed interest, Jay was willing to give us the exact coordinates, straight from the witness himself, whose name is Steve Kruger, by the way. He didn't insist on anonymity or anything, so it's.
I think his name's been published.
It's been published a ton of times, so it's weird not to mention him, frankly. Mm-hmm. But Jay was able to talk to Steve and get us the exact coordinates for that sighting, so we could go check it out. And so we initially went during the day a few weeks ago, just to kind of scout the location, because we hadn't really done a lot of investigating out in that area specifically yet. So, excuse me, it seemed like it would be a good idea. And in general, whenever possible, if we're going to a new location, we want to go out there during the day and kind of get the lay of the land, take a look around and sort of see what we're dealing with. And then we can always come back at another time, which is exactly what we did. So this would have been, was it last weekend or 2 weeks ago?
It was last weekend.
Last weekend. Okay. So last weekend we decided that we wanted to go back because the anniversary of the 2006 sighting is November 9th. And so, we weren't going to be able to go exactly on November 9th, but we could get pretty close. So we decided to go last Saturday. Before we went, I did some more scouting. I wanted to look up maps of the Ice Age Trail in that area, kind of see the route and everything, because I thought, now the sighting location itself is not an area that lends itself well to investigation necessarily. It's literally like the intersection of two roads out in the country, and you have a little developed cul-de-sac at the end of one of those roads, and so it's private property for the most part, that particular sighting location. But there are all of these trails out and around Holy Hill, most notably the Ice Age Trail, that you can take, and it'll basically take you all the way around Holy Hill and past this sighting location. If you follow the Ice Age Trail, you actually pass within less than 1 mile of the actual sighting location. So, to my mind, if there is something out roaming in there or that lives there, this relatively natural wilderness area around Holy Hill and the land preserved for the Ice Age Trail seems like as likely a place as any in that area to run into it. So we wanted, for this investigation, we wanted to go basically begin in the afternoon and then sort of work through dusk and then end at nighttime, to try to see the area in every lighting condition. Yeah. And we'll be going back multiple times. It's really because, of course, as we all know, with any good investigation, you really need to return to the area, multiple times and continue to collect evidence.
I mean, Jay's been in the kettle for over 5 years now, and there's no sign of stopping. So.
No, yeah, absolutely.
And we're starting this one, and it's also worth mentioning that. So for those who might not be aware, Jay Pachochin does most of his research in the southern kettle moraine. Mm-hmm. Holy Hill is in the northern part of the same forest.
Right.
So, sorry if you just mentioned that before. But
no, I didn't. That's a good point.
So it's just, it's almost like two investigations in one in a way, because it is the same forest. What can you compare?
Right.
So.
Yeah, interesting. I guess, and for anybody who's not familiar, so the kettle moraine basically is it's a natural formation caused by the movement of glaciers through Wisconsin, like thousands of years ago, and the glaciers basically like moved the earth around because of course they're very, very powerful, and so what you ended up with were a bunch of hills, and then these kettles, these sort of like deep valleys between them. So it can be difficult terrain, frankly, and there's lots of weird little like nooks and crannies where something could hide, frankly, if it really wanted to. So like I said, we wanted to examine this among all lighting conditions at first and kind of see what there was to see during each. And right away we noticed at the very beginning, we got there, it was probably 2:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, it's a relatively active area at that time because it is, people do like to hike there. And by relatively active, I mean, there were maybe 2 or 3 other people or groups of people using the trail, which is normal for daytime. So, we get there, I see other people there, and I go, okay, well, chances are good nothing much happens here during the day, but we're going to hike the trails anyway and sort of see. And, sure enough, with the people there, and I don't know that it's necessarily related, but probably, with the trail being as active as it was at that time, we really didn't experience anything until much later. It was probably an hour before dusk. We got to Came Hill,
which is a name for another formation, and it was a very, very steep hill.
Well, yeah, it's no joke.
I walked up that, and I was just like, okay, I'm gonna sit down for a minute.
I was a little out of breath, to say the least. But it was probably an hour before dusk, and by the time we got out to Came Hill, we hadn't seen anybody for some time, and we really didn't see anybody after that.
No,
I know we didn't see anybody at all after that.
There's neighborhoods around. I think a lot of people.
There are some private homes.
Yeah. There's people definitely, I think, who live in that area just hop on the trail during the day and walk their dog, take a walk with the family. They probably don't hike the whole thing, but they walk segments of it. So I think that's what you'll run into anytime you are over there. Oh, sure.
And one other thing, I guess, the Ice Age Trail, it intersects several roads. So, the way that you end up going past the Steve Kruger sighting area is, you're crossing Holy Hill Road. And when you do that, then, the intersection of Holy Hill Road and Troll Hill Road is about just under a mile to your east. Like once you do that. So by the time we got to Came Hill, there really weren't many people out. I was kind of a overcast, drizzling day anyway. Yeah, extremely windy. And, really by that time, I think most people just weren't interested in a lot of recreational hiking. And we get up to the top of Came Hill, and somebody had built, it looked like maybe like a wiki up, some kind of semi-permanent shelter, basically.
Bunch of sticks.
But they take a bunch of sticks and it's sort of like a teepee shape. And yeah, I didn't really have any reason. It looked creepy, but we didn't really have any reason to suspect, that it was anything other than something that maybe some backpackers or survivalists or something had just decided to make it at the top of this particular hill.
And even later on, there's another hill we went up, not as steep, but it also had another wicket.
It was another lookout hill.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I would guess people like to build them at the top of these huge hills because, if you're going to use it as a temporary shelter or something, you've got high ground. If it rains, you're not going to get flooded out or anything. It made sense in a lot of ways, frankly. And it's right off the trail too. So, I would be surprised if you're talking about cryptid or, something that doesn't want to be found, that's not a very good place to hide, because people definitely go there. But that is the first place that we started hearing some unusual sounds.
Right.
What was the first one you remember?
The first one I remember, I was like, it sounded like a baby crying.
That was creepy.
And we heard that a couple times.
We did hear that a couple of times.
And you could hear there's a lot of trees creaking out there and
because it was really windy again.
And you could hear some wildlife, but that was not anything that, and I, just for reference, I grew up close to that area. My grandparents actually lived pretty close to Holy Hill area, and I spent a lot of time with them and out there as a kid, and probably up till high school when they did end up moving out of that area. And I feel like I've heard all the wildlife out in that area, and having been there so many times, and I don't remember hearing a baby crying or anything. I mean, I was probably out there during the day, but
Sure. It seemed unusual, to say the least. Again, there weren't any people around. We hadn't seen anybody in some time. And it's really not the kind of place that you would bring a baby, frankly. No.
It's actually kind of
you can't bring a stroller on these trails. I mean, they're rough trails.
Yeah. I think you were reading some hiking blogs and they called it moderate.
Yeah, it's rated as moderate difficulty.
And they're a bit more difficult than what we are used to when exploring with Jay down in the Kettle. He usually goes on pretty wide, steady trails with very slight inclines. This is very rocky,
So, some of these trails, if you're not careful, you could go sliding down into a kettle and you'd slide 30, 40, 50 feet before you stopped, unless you maybe hit a tree or something.
And nothing's stopping anything that's underneath you from coming up.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, it's just you wouldn't bring little kids there, frankly. So, it was really unusual. We've heard, certainly we enjoy being in nature. And so we've heard a lot of different sounds that can be startling, that have normal explanations. We've all heard baby deer bleeding, stuff like that. And that's bleating, by the way, not bleeding. I think I might have just want to make that clear, because they make a very distinctive sound,
It's almost like a
basically
something like that.
And so we know what that sounds like, and this definitely was not that.
No.
And it's really not the right time of year for that anyway, frankly.
Right.
So that doesn't make sense for a couple of different reasons.
There was a creepy childlike laughter, like you'd hear in a horror movie or something. It was kind of distorted. It was so weird. That was probably the creepiest to me. And that was, I think it was sunset, dusk, twilight time when I heard that. That was creepy. I did not care for that.
So what was this creature supposed to look like?
Well, the way he had described it was as in upright bipedal
canid.
Canid. Yeah. So it's this dog-like or wolf-like being, but it had this much shorter muzzle that he compared to a bear.
So he called it a bear wolf?
Right? Yeah, he literally, because people will, when they repeat the story, they'll say, dog man or something. But he's always been insistent that he never called it dog man. He called it a bear wolf, because it seemed to share some features of some ursine and canine features. So he described like a shorter muzzle, but the ears more like on top of its head. Now, keep in mind when Steve Kruger saw this, he was in his truck. He was a contractor for the DNR, and as part of his job, he would pick up like dead animals, and he'd happened to pick up a deer that evening, and so he had this dead deer in the bed of his truck, and this thing seemingly was attracted to this dead deer and snatched it out of the bed of his truck while he was parked at this intersection. Mm-hmm. And so when he saw it through the rear lights of his truck and in his rear view mirror. So, I think he got a good enough look at it, but, not as well as if it had been maybe better lit. And, if he had been able to sort of see the entire thing, not just through his rear view mirror. And that's not taking anything away from his testimony. It's just, just sort of is what it is. I think he was being authentic to his experience and everything. And so, really, as far as we know, like I said, from what he had reported, it was some sort of bipedal, unknown canid-like cryptid that had some features of a bear. So it seems honestly pretty unique, although the southern unit of the kettle moraine is known for like those upright canid sightings, and obviously Bigfoot sightings as well. So it's interesting that this sighting came like Emily noted in this northern section of the same forest system. So, but what else?
When it got dark, we noticed a couple little like white fairy lights, which we have also seen in the southern kettle moraine while out with Jay. So I thought that was pretty interesting. They're very like sprite-like, almost like will-o'-the-wisp. And you will, when you're out there by Holy Hill, because there are roads and there are some private homes, you can definitely tell the difference between one of the lights from the homes or the road and these, because these are almost like tiny white fireflies. And we've seen them in the summer in the kettle, but they are not fireflies because of their color. And also it's November right now, so there's not really any fireflies out anyways.
Well, sure. Certainly this time of year, I think you can safely rule that out.
Exactly. So I've always thought them maybe like a little tiny white sparkle that moves around.
Yeah, it's a pretty good description. I mean, that's literally what they look like.
So we saw a few of those, I think.
We did, yeah. And, honestly, interestingly enough, there's one portion of the trail that goes right by this bog, basically. There's this big swampy area. And, that is where I saw one of them. And you can tell now, again, like Emily mentioned, this trail crosses a couple of roads. So there are occasionally headlights. There are some private homes, like even where where Steve had his sighting.
Yeah, there's some right back.
Yeah, there are some private homes back there. And so you can see lights through the trees, but it's pretty easy to make the distinction, between either moving headlights where a road is, which is another good reason to study a map before you go somewhere, so you know what you're looking at, what's supposed to be there. But anyway, it's really easy to make the distinction, between these stationary lights and moving headlights, and these tiny, almost like pinprick white lights moving, say across a field. Because when they're moving, you can see that there are features of the landscape that are definitely behind them, and that's not going to happen if you're looking at like headlights through trees or a stationary light through trees. You're going to have trees and foliage and stuff in front of those lights too, but that's not the case with these. These will be 20, 30 feet away from you with nothing in between at all. So yeah, they're very unusual. And again, it's so interesting that we experienced so much of the same things at this Ice Age trail that we had been experiencing in the southern unit of the Kettle Moraine State Forest.
Yep.
So other than the fairy lights and then that, I mean, there was the only thing that stuck out to me otherwise, and this is probably perfectly explainable. I'll mention it anyway. I did hear a loud huff, but there's deer out there, and I assumed it was probably a buck or something, because they'll make that noise.
Oh yeah.
And so that was one where I heard it and I was like, well, that's probably, by that time it was dark out. I couldn't see anything even with my light, but that doesn't mean there wasn't a deer hidden somewhere. So
somebody had pointed out a deer earlier in the day.
Sure.
Off the trail. So I imagine there's a bunch up there. So
I bet.
Saw a few deer carcasses on the way in anyways.
Yeah.
So there's a couple more comments, and Dean Thompson is asking what the beer of choice is tonight.
The beer of choice? This is a Christmas ale by Bell's. It's very good if you ever find it.
It is a holiday favorite, yeah.
Yeah, so we usually get that.
So Alma Felix, she says hi, and Nick says hi, and Sharon did say the same thing. She said those are fairies. The little lights.
Right.
So if we wanted to go from here to your book, are there any really good points in your book that you'd like to talk about?
Boy, there's a lot to cover in the book. I think it'd probably be pretty interesting to talk about some of the ones that like Emily and I really got to dig into.
Okay.
One that comes immediately to mind for me, and anybody not familiar with the book, I guess I can start with a little bit of an introduction. So
that's it again, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And Emily's beautiful cover.
Yes,
of course. I can see the poster of it in the background there, Greg.
I had to pull it all out. No, all the stops are out tonight.
Love it. So we've been actively investigating winged humanoid sightings around Lake Michigan since the spring of 2017. Basically, that spring, we had seen a trio of sightings come through the Mutual UFO Network case management system. MUFON published an article about these sightings, and at the time, of course, we were writing the news for the Singular Fortean Society. And so, I saw that come through and I was like, well, this will make a interesting article. I think that our readers would at least enjoy hearing about it. This is the information we have from MUFON. Honestly, I didn't expect a lot to come out of it. MUFON doesn't share a lot of information. And beyond that, like if they were just one-off sightings, then I figured people would forget about them and that would just be it. But instead, what happened was these reports kept coming in. And they started coming in to Manuel Navarrete over at UFO Clearinghouse. He's a paranormal investigator who concentrates largely on UFOs in Chicago. He lives in the Chicago area. And then, of course, Lon Strickler out in Pennsylvania with Phantoms and Monsters. And Lon has had a very popular paranormal website. His blog has been, like everybody knows Phantoms and Monsters blog. And so, it made sense for him to get a lot of reports himself, because frankly, when anything's going on, somebody is going to report it to Lon just because his site is popular enough. And so I started seeing these reports, coming through them. And at this time, I didn't know those guys. I just thought, well, as a journalist, if I really want to cover these sightings, I have to talk to these guys, you know, like they're getting these reports. I want to learn about them. And so I did. I reached out to both of them individually and requested interviews. They were both very gracious and accepted, of course. And, you know, I interviewed them at the time, found them to be very forthright, very open, and really most notably to me, very unwilling to really land anywhere, like really unwilling to make any real determination, because I felt that they were really trying to be objective. So they were getting these reports, but frankly, they didn't really know what to make of them. They were just doing their best to investigate them as they came in, and sort of let the witness testimony and the results of their investigation speak for themselves.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't too long after that, you know, that after continually communicating with them and you know, finding out that we knew a lot of the same people, and they went ahead and asked if we didn't want to go ahead and just help investigate, because we're just up in Madison. You know, we're only from some of the sighting areas in Illinois, we were only an hour away. It's only 2.5 hours at the most to Chicago. And so, of course, we accepted, because I mean, it wasn't too long after we started writing articles about you know, Lon and Manuel sightings that we were getting our own sighting reports. People started reaching out to us directly, and you know, at that point, you know, we're a part of it. You know, we're investigating it, and so there's just no reason not to work together with everybody else. And so the rest is kind of history as far as how it all came together, but that's definitely how it began. And since then, between the three of us, and by the three of us, I mean the Singular Fortean Society, UFO Clearinghouse, and Phantoms and Monsters, there's been well over, it's got to be over 100 different sighting reports. And then if you add in, you know, all of the sort of like correlative phenomena that seems to happen in the same areas, and it's, you know, it's well over 100 different, you know, sighting reports. And it's not just in Chicago. It's not just around Chicago. And I know that Chicago gets a lot of attention, which makes sense because there's a huge population there.
Yeah.
It's the third largest city in the U.S. And so,
it's a big, shiny city.
Yeah. I mean, people want to make it about Chicago because there's a lot of interest from people who live in Chicago, of course. But the fact is, we've actually received reports from every state that borders Lake Michigan. I don't know what they have to do with Lake Michigan. It really was more that Lake Michigan was a convenient geographic point that you could look at and say, well, for whatever reason, these sightings are all coming from within a few hundred miles of this Great Lake. It's difficult to know exactly what the reason is for that, but you know, there's something to it. It's certainly like I said, it's the sort of epicenter from which all of the sightings seem to emanate. So, you know, that was sort of our thought process behind, you know, Lake Michigan Mothman, because, you know, I don't want to call it the Chicago Mothman because we've got a bunch of sightings from right. Indiana. We've got sightings from Wisconsin, you know. I suppose speaking of, you know, there was one in particular in Wisconsin that was really interesting.
It was in McWanago.
Right. Do you want to start off on that one, or do you want me to?
Why don't you start, because you had initial contact with the witness, and I don't want to screw up my dates.
Oh, that's no problem. So this guy had his sighting right around the same time as the MUFON sightings came in the spring of 2017. And he had contacted Lon a while after that. It was probably close to a year afterwards. And, you know, Lon contacted us because this guy lived in McWanago, Wisconsin. So for anybody who's not familiar with southeastern Wisconsin, McGuanago is a tiny town about 45 minutes outside of Milwaukee. It's in a very rural area, and certainly this sighting location was pretty rural, frankly. Which makes sense because a lot of the sightings are. So Lon put us in contact with this witness, and I spoke to him over the phone first. And as a result of that conversation, he agreed to allow Emily and I to go out and photograph the location. He'd take us around and show us where everything happened, and we could get his testimony directly. So we went out there. It was a lovely spring morning, beautiful sunny day. Mm-hmm. And we met this guy at his parents' house. So, excuse me, as his story goes, at the time he was living with his parents, and he was coming home one night from hanging out with friends. And on the way home, he was talking to his friend over the phone. And when he got home, it was pretty late. It was like midnight or something. And so, he decided, hey, I'm talking on the phone. I'm going to finish my phone conversation out here, because if I walk into the house talking to my friend on the phone, I might wake my parents up, and, nobody needs that. And so he's outside, and he's talking on the phone. And that particular day, and I was able to verify this with historical weather data, that particular day, it had been misting out. And so it wasn't raining per se, but, it was wet, and, so it was still kind of like misting. And as he is looking out the windshield of his van, which he had backed into their long gravel driveway, he sees this huge silhouette of something standing in front of his vehicle. So he didn't have his headlights on or anything. And at that point, the only thing providing any illumination, because of course, keep in mind, there's no moon or anything, it's overcast, it's still misting out, was the lamppost at the end of their driveway, which was about 50 feet away. We did measure that just to make sure. And so in the ambient light of that, he could see this figure. And so he's momentarily confused, of course, and decides he wants to know what exactly is standing in front of his van. So he turns the headlights on. And when he does that, he sees what he described as a winged bat dragon. Like those were his words. And I understand sometimes when people hear something like that, and maybe they think it's a little silly, as far as names go. But I think what people need to understand is, if I may digress briefly, it can be very, very difficult for people to describe these sightings. Like it's very difficult for people to conceptualize something so far outside of their experience. So often people will just kind of grasp onto any descriptive language they can. They'll compare what they saw to something they've seen in a movie before. Like we get, Jeepers Creepers a lot. And that shouldn't be considered a strike against them in any way. It's literally, it is so difficult to describe something that is completely alien to you that I think people really, really struggle. So what he came up with was winged bat dragon. And he said that because it had been misting out, he could sort of tell that it had this sort of scaly skin, and he said it had these large membranous wings, like bat wings, and that the wings were wrapped around it, sort of like how a bat will wrap its wings around itself while it's hanging upside down. Only, of course, this thing was standing straight up, and he said it had a relatively like normal, I think, humanoid head, but it had these huge black eyes. And this whole time he's still talking on the phone with his friend. Yeah. And his friend can verify that. And so he's looking at this thing, and it looks at him, and he's terrified, of course. And he's kind of silent for like the first few seconds until his friend's like, "Are you okay?" And then he starts telling his friend what he saw. And as he's looking at this thing, he says it sort of blurs, and then it's just gone. And he didn't know if that meant that it literally just vanished, as though it like teleported or something similar, or if it just moved so fast that it moved, faster than his eye could keep track of. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that was the end of his sighting. It just sort of blurs, and then it's gone. And so we went out there and we were able to corroborate all of the measurable details of his story. The van was parked in the same place, so we were able to sort of see where everything was in position to that. Certainly his story added up completely in every detail from everything we could measure. The lamppost being only 50 feet away, providing that like initial illumination of the creature. Again, a check of historical weather data confirmed exactly what he said as far as the weather at that time, which seemed to affect the sighting. Mm-hmm. Since the van was in the same position, we actually had Emily go inside, and I stood the approximate distance from the van that the witness said he had seen this thing. And I'm 6'2", and he said that this thing's head from where I was standing was at the top of the windshield, which puts it has to be 8.5 feet tall minimum, which is huge, and also corresponds to his initial estimate when I asked him how what size he thought it was. Mm-hmm. Another thing about this case that I'll probably never forget, frankly, is, again, now, it was pretty gloomy when he had his sighting, but when we were out there talking to him, it was a bright, beautiful spring morning, and this guy was still terrified. He was sweating, telling this story, just visibly shaken in broad daylight, relating his experience to us, and that's something that, it's one thing, I think, for people to read stories on the internet, or even in a book. It's another when you're face to face with another grown adult, and you can see the effect that something like this has had on them. Yeah, and that sticks with you, and it's really why it's a big part of why we do what we do. But it really, I think, serves to show the importance of field work. Mm-hmm. Of being willing to go out, do the work, verify everything, most importantly, meet the people who experience this stuff, and try to provide them support, frankly, because that's the other part of this that we've seen so often, is that these sightings can be traumatic. They have really deep long-term effects on people. Mm-hmm. And let me give you the most common narrative that we hear time and again from witnesses. They'll see something, similar to the McGuanago witness. Although, interestingly enough, his description of the creature was very different than what we normally get. Doesn't mean that's not what he saw. It just means maybe it was something else than what other people are seeing, or maybe there's a variety of different related phenomena. But anyway, people will see these winged humanoids, and they're terrified. These are very impactful events, and they want to tell somebody. They want to tell somebody that they care about. So they'll go to a loved one, could be a spouse, sibling, close friend, and they'll tell them, and they get laughed at by these people that they trust. And so they don't talk about it again. They bottle it up, they internalize it, until they find somebody like us that they can talk to about it. And it means a lot to people. I remember myself having paranormal experiences and not being able to talk to people. And when I finally could, after I had grown up and I had met other people with similar experiences and found out that there were a lot of people outside of the books that I had read as a kid, but actual people I could talk to about this stuff, that meant a lot to me. And so, it means a lot to us to be able to provide that for people as well. So,
that's that story.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting story, but, I just think it really is from the witness's perspective. I think it's fairly representative of sort of the process that people have to work through, after these sightings, because again, like they have a huge effect on people. So,
well, you're still getting the ones from O'Hare.
Yeah.
So
yeah, those are still coming in.
And those all have red eyes though, right?
Often. Yeah. Now I'd have to look at each report individually, but I know for sure that some of them, absolutely, people are reporting the red eyes. And, I'm actually glad you brought that up, because that is the more common descriptor. And so, like I said, like that McGuanago sighting, the description that the witness gave us was very different outside of a few aspects, like the membranous wings, than what people usually report. And you're absolutely right. Far more often, you'll get something described as completely black, very, very little detail other than the humanoid shape, but these glowing red eyes. And that certainly has been the case in and around O'Hare. I spoke to a gentleman personally. This would have been end of last year. And he was a cargo employee. Like he worked for one of the cargo companies in O'Hare. And he had worked late one night and he was going to go meet his friend for a drink after work. And, he drove out of the airport. And, as he's driving, there is this grassy field area, basically. There's a huge fence in front of it, like a 7 or 8 foot tall fence. But then behind that fence, there's like this grassy area. And then you've got like, cargo buildings and stuff. Whoops. And so he's driving past it and he says he looks over and he sees this creature, this all black humanoid creature with these huge wings. And he says he sees these glowing red eyes. And interestingly, this is one of those witnesses that described to me personally feeling this sense of evil. So he's terrified, of course, but he feels this palpable sense of evil, and it's something that I've sort of struggled with, because certainly nobody has been physically harmed or anything. These creatures, whatever they are, if they had wanted to hurt most of these witnesses, they had ample opportunity, but they never have. And so I don't know if the people who describe that sense of evil are describing it because, they're afraid and, they're viewing it through a particular, cultural lens. Often you'll get people who maybe have certain religious views and maybe they'll ascribe some sort of, demonic aspect to it or something. So, but he definitely described it that way. And that's something that we've seen a few times out of the O'Hare witnesses, which makes me suspect that it's not just him, that people really are feeling something that makes, that they interpret as evil for whatever reason. And I don't know if that's something that this thing does deliberately, but it wouldn't surprise me, frankly. The fear that people feel, even the palpable sense of evil some people describe, it almost feels deliberate, as though in at least some cases that's the whole point of the sighting. It seems to me in a lot of ways that people are feeling that way because whatever this thing is wants them to feel that way. And I don't know if it's a means to scare people off, or it's some, I don't know, crazy social experiment where, it just wants to see how humans react to being terrified. But that's it's a common thread.
So for the history of the dates of the sightings, is there any correlation between what's gone on around the Midwest and, say, for instance, West Virginia, Point Pleasant?
As far as the actual date. Timeline, the oldest report we received was from a guy named Gerald Therese. He's in Illinois native. And he had a sighting back in 1957, which would have been 9 years before Point Pleasant.
Right.
Yeah. And then, I can check our timeline as far as sightings concurrent to the Point Pleasant sightings. I don't remember there being any, although there was one reported not long after, at all, in, I believe it was 1969. Let me just take a look here. So, our oldest sighting is in 57, and then our timeline of the sightings we've collected. And, honestly, historical sightings are coming in relatively frequently as people see these reports. Because, again, most people, most normal people, they don't know who the Mothman is. They've never heard of Mothman. They have no idea that other people are seeing winged humanoids. And so they'll hang on to these sightings because, again, they might tell them to somebody close to them and get laughed at. Well, then they're sure as hell not going to go to the media or anybody else with it.
They'll be thrown in a straitjacket.
Right, exactly. They're not going to call the police, because what are the police going to do? There's no crime that's been committed. And so, these people will hang on to these sightings for years, sometimes decades. In Gerald's case, I mean, he held on to his sighting for 60 years. And so there's an interesting correlation with the Point Pleasant sightings, of course, in that the general description of the creature is very, very similar. You've got this humanoid creature that people will, and this is another thing about the Point Pleasant sightings that a lot of people may not be familiar with, but there was a range of descriptions. So much like in the Lake Michigan Mothman investigation, where we've seen a range of descriptions of this creature, where people will sometimes refer to it as bird-like, sometimes bat-like. The same thing was happening in Point Pleasant in the 1960s. People weren't always describing literally the exact same thing. I think that's an impression that has been given as the story has been diluted through time, and now you have this sort of internet representation of it, rather than actually going back and looking at the news articles, looking at John Keel's work and seeing what people were actually describing, which was kind of all over the place in the same way that we're seeing today. So there's a correlation in the witness descriptions of this creature or creatures. We don't know if it's more than one, but I would assume it is, considering how much it seems to get around.
Yeah.
And then as far as the timeline is concerned, starting before Point Pleasant and then continuing just after. And frankly, we don't know if there are historical reports around Lake Michigan from that time or not. There could be, and we just haven't heard them yet. But we do know that in the Ohio River Valley there, people never stopped reporting Mothman. A lot of people like to imagine that the sightings in that area stopped in 1967, but they didn't. They absolutely did not. People still come forward today in that area with Mothman sightings. So there are sightings that have happened concurrently that we definitely know of, just not during the like the most famous 1966 to 1967 flap.
You know, family wise, you know, you would figure that there's got to be pods of them. Is the only way I would put it from what I was thinking about. And then the relationship or the relationship between them and UFO sightings. And interdimensional travel is another part that would explain why they jump back and forth. When you put your stuff together, and you know, you're very thorough on your approach. I know that, and it seems that if somebody down the road went ahead and start putting out a big map and started to get all this stuff to it probably would mesh. You know, the only thing that would throw it off would be the interdimensional part, I think.
Well, and that's an interesting point, because there certainly seems to be, you know, some evidence of something like that happening, at least from the witness testimony. So, you know, of course we have that McGuanago witness who sees the thing blur and then disappear. But we also have other witnesses in Rockford, for instance, Rockford, Illinois, where, you know, people had basically seen the same thing, where they see this flying humanoid and then it just suddenly disappears seemingly into thin air.
Right.
And that's difficult to know what to do with, but certainly that parallel universe or interdimensional hypothesis. I mean, that's been popular, of course, since the 60s, you know, and the concurrent UFO sightings in the same areas. Like, that's another thing, of course, that the Lake Michigan Mothman has in common with the Point Pleasant and Ohio River Valley sightings, is that, there are very often UFO sightings in not just similar areas or nearby, but in the literal exact same area.
Right.
You know, we also get a decent amount of anomalous avian sightings. So like thunderbirds or pterosaurs also reported in these same sighting areas. And that's another thing, you know, that Keel had noted, you know, back in the 60s in the same area as the Point Pleasant Mothman. So there's no shortage of high strangeness. Sorry.
Isn't that like kind of too with the thunderbirds and pterosaurs? Isn't that like an Illinois thing too?
Yeah, I mean, Illinois has been known for Thunderbird sightings since at least the 70s. I mean, there was the Lawndale incident, and I think that was, I don't want to say in case I get it wrong. I want to say 71, but I'm not 100% on that.
It's like the 70s or 80s.
Do you think that part's related to Native American culture?
Well, you know, that's a tough one, because most representations of Thunderbirds, you know, you'll see, you know, you don't see in the Midwest. I mean, that's more of a Southwest kind of thing. So
except for the Piasaw bird.
But the Piasaw bird, if you look at the actual image of that thing, it doesn't look anything like an actual Thunderbird. It looks like a weird dragon.
Right.
Yeah, actually, you're right.
Right. So
I didn't think about that in my head.
It really does. Like, for anybody who isn't familiar, there's a legend in Alton, Illinois, of this thing called the Piasaw bird, which, you know, according to indigenous belief, was this flying monster that literally would just snatch people up and take them back to its cave and devour them, and then leave their bones in its cave. And it was eventually lured out and killed. But there is this, well, now it's a recreation. At one time, the indigenous people of that area had created this huge mural, and since then it's been destroyed and like recreated. I don't remember the exact story of how it happened, but if you look at the image of this thing as painted on this cliff face in Alton, Illinois, it is this like quadrupedal, almost serpentine, like dragon looking thing that certainly doesn't seem to be like any Thunderbird I've ever heard of. You know, it doesn't look like a bird; it looks like a dragon. And
then you got the whole paranormal concentration there too in Alton.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely do. I mean, Troy Taylor can tell you about that.
I don't know if anybody can see that.
I just see bright.
It's probably just your screen.
Sorry, I tried to show the bird.
That's okay. That's okay.
If you look up Alton, Illinois, PIASA bird, you can find it.
Oh, sure.
For anybody who's watching who wants to look it up.
Oh, I mean, we have the legend and everything that we researched on the website too. You could go to our monsters section and just look under Piasa bird, and you can learn all about the original legend and everything behind it.
All your links are on the comments page too, so on Facebook. Excellent. So that's all covered there. You know, if you want to go a little extra, that's fine. It's up to you.
Sure.
I don't know what you guys got going, and you know, look, if we do this out of the whole entire book that you wrote, and I know there's people in the group that have wrote other books. If you were to go ahead and say the best pages in this book are of what incident?
Oh, that's hard.
Or did you already cover it?
That was one of them.
There was one. Well, there's one other one I have in mind, but I want to see what Emily says to see if she says the same one.
It's going to be the same one.
What is it?
Woodstock.
Yeah, definitely. Woodstock.
That's my favorite one.
It really is. That was another one where we really got to dig in and go to the site and everything. So this would have been February 2019.
Yes.
A gentleman in Woodstock, Illinois, ran out just for a simple errand. He needed to go to Walgreens and pick something up. And
I think it was milk.
Yeah, it was just something totally mundane.
Yep. And
he's driving home, and as he passes the Dewfield Pond Conservation Area, it's dark out. Since it was February, he was driving home at, I think it was around 8 p.m. And, you know, obviously the sun in northern Illinois has set, you know, by then. And so it's dark outside. And he sees, as he's coming up on the entrance to this conservation area, in the road, something in his headlights. And he described it as a 7 or 8 foot tall, furry humanoid, but with these large, leathery, gargoyle-like wings.
It was almost like a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch.
With crazy bat gargoyle wings. Yeah. And so he says this thing is walking out into the road. He sees it for, you know, several seconds as it's in his headlights, and then it's across the street and it's gone. And so across the street from this conservation area entrance, there's a house, because there are like a few houses on this road. They're not really particularly close to each other, but there is a house. And then behind that, there is the McHenry County Fairgrounds. So it's this huge open area, and then it's like a bunch of rural, you know, woods and fields and stuff behind that. And so this thing was headed that direction. So, you know, really once it makes it past that house, nobody's really going to be anywhere to see it. So it's kind of going from one natural area past a house to another natural area. And so, you know, he sees this thing, and he doesn't know what to make of it, frankly. And so this was another one where he had actually contacted Lon, and then Lon contacted us to say, hey, can you guys get down there and you know, talk to these people? And so I talked to the gentleman over the phone first, and I could tell immediately over the phone that he had seen something that had disturbed him quite a bit. And so, you know, I talked to him for a little while, And he did eventually agree that for us to be able to come down there. And so we did, obviously. And he was a great guy. We met his wife. They both took us out to the area of his sighting. So they showed us around the Dewfield Pond Conservation Area, which is a pretty sizable natural area, honestly. At the time of his sighting, the entrance itself was closed. They close it during like certain parts of the year, I guess. So there were some like footprints back there, but not a ton. There were a lot of natural animal prints. You could see, where some people had, maybe been walking their dog, but then you could also see footprints from like
waterfowl, birds.
Looked to be probably sandhill crane or great blue heron. Like that was the shape of the bird tracks we saw back there. Yeah. And while they were leading us around, actually, we found in the ice what looked like a distorted humanoid barefoot print. So, I looked down and I noticed this print, and it would have been heading in the direction of the entrance to the park, which would be the direction that the witness said this thing was going. And it looked like it had fully articulated toes. So it's just picture a human footprint barefoot in ice, but much bigger. So it's, it was, much longer than you would expect and wider. And there was only one. I didn't see any other prints that matched it in that area. So I don't know how that one in particular came to be there. But it was a really interesting, it was a really interesting thing to find, of course, because it just fit the story so perfectly. I know they didn't put it there, and so I had to wonder, where it came from. And that Woodstock area turned out to be a fairly interesting area. There were other reports received, not as say thorough, like or as thoroughly investigated as this initial witness, and that had everything to do with the cooperativeness of the later witnesses, and that's nothing against them. Like, frankly, a lot of people get cold feet. A lot of people, once they've told the story, that's all they want to have to do with it. Yeah. Frankly, they just want to sort of have this cathartic release, exercise it from their life, and not have to think about it anymore. So you don't always get that level of witness cooperation where they're willing to take you out to the sighting area and lead you around. But we did have some other interesting sightings from that area, not the least of which was one where this gentleman contacted us by email and said that, he had been outside of a different drugstore, but sort of in the same area. And it was late at night, and there's this fence between the parking lot and the McHenry County Fairgrounds. And he said that he had seen this, 7 or 8 foot tall, hairy winged humanoid. And he said it had charged the fence, and that he had been, frightened enough that he called 911, like he called the police. And so, of course, I asked him, like, well, hey, do you have a copy of the police report? Would you be willing to speak to me directly? But he never got back to us. So I was like, well, this could be a bust, but why don't I file a FOIA request just to see? Because if he did call 911, there's going to be a record of it. Mm-hmm. And so I got a hold of the McHenry County Sheriff's Department, and I issued this FOIA request for any police reports or information they would have about this particular incident, because I knew when it had happened. I had those details that I could give them, and like, I think it was only 2 or 3 days, which is a really nice turnaround Frankly, I was impressed by that. They got back to me and said, yeah, here you go. We have this incident detail report from this guy who definitely called 911. And he gave a description of this creature, and a sheriff's deputy went out there. There was no official police report because, no crime had been committed, and the investigation didn't turn up a monster or anything. So really what they had was the incident detail report from 911, but it still proved that this guy wasn't just yanking our chain. He had at least been inspired to call 911 for some reason, and certainly you have to allow for the possibility that reason was that he saw what he said he saw, because that's not something people tend to do very lightly.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Did it go over the fence then? Did it just jump up or what?
No, he said that it charged the fence and then took off. So, picture maybe a bluff charge, like a adult male gorilla or something would do.
Yeah.
So, which was it was an interesting detail for sure.
So that the other one that you were talking about with the footprint, I was thinking that if there's only 1 foot, that would be when he would be taking off.
I mean, it could be, I thought of that, maybe because, it was all ice and snow. So footprints get destroyed relatively easily. Maybe his stride was long enough where, we just couldn't find the other ones. Yeah. Maybe like you said, it had those wings or whatever. Maybe it just launched itself. I don't know. But it was weird. But yeah, that probably was the most interesting area that we investigated or have so far.
And I think part of it was the connection. And I feel like that was a witness that we felt like we particularly helped, because he was clearly afraid and very nervous. And as soon as we talked to him, he got it off his chest, and then he felt like he could go on with his life in a way, because it had clearly bothered him to the point where he couldn't hold it in, and he didn't want to share with anybody because of, he didn't want to be seen as the town crazy. He wanted to keep his reputation.
Well, these are, and I should mention this, I won't out these people, but they are professionals in their area. They had everything to lose if this story came out attached to them.
Yep.
Which I think was part of why, they were so nervous. But, he clearly was obsessing over it to a certain degree. And just like Emily said, felt like, they didn't know where to go as far as anybody who could help them at least help talk them through it.
Yep.
And so, that was one that really meant a lot to us too. For that reason, these people literally could work in your office. They could go to your church. They could be literally anybody, and you wouldn't know, frankly.
So let's end it on this one. And Danny Bott says, have they investigated the Bray Road in Elkhorn at all?
We did one. There was a photograph that was making the rounds a while ago that somebody said or claimed to be of Dogman. It looked to me like it was sort of, maybe it was maybe Photoshop, maybe some poorly taxidermied.
I think it was a poorly taxidermied.
You would know better than I would.
Yeah, because if you can picture it, it's like a picture of a road at night, and there's a speed limit sign, and the headlight's hitting it. And the way the headlight is hitting the Frankenstein taxidermied canid figure is very much so what you would, if you were to come across an animal at night, like a deer off the side of the road, that is what you would.
So it was consistent with it being a physical object in the photograph.
In the photograph,
okay.
Yeah. So the light wasn't, what I look for a lot in these photographs is the light on the subject does it make sense? Is it consistent with the light in the scene?
That makes sense. Okay.
So
thank you.
to me, it did. And I think with it being a poorly textured thing, if it was photoshopped, they'd probably have done a better job with creating the creature.
That's fair. And so it really looked like this kind of poorly taxidermied creation. And so, we had received the sighting area. This was one, I think Lon sent this our way, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Lon, he's a busy guy. So, he was like, well, you guys live out there, here's this guy's information. He contacted me, said he took this photograph, out by Elkhorn, near Bray Road. Like, here's where he said the exact location he said he took it. And I was like, okay. And I reached out to the guy and I was like, I introduced us
mm-hmm.
and, told him what we were about, and we never heard back from him, so that was kind of a red flag because, he initially seemed really interested in this sighting or, in this purported sighting. And then we went out there, of course, and we investigated the sighting area. And it doesn't match up with his photograph. Like, there's a speed limit sign in his photograph that does not exist anywhere near this sighting area. We looked for like 2 miles up and down both sides of the road.
We had to get off the road and come back around a couple times.
Right, just to be thorough.
Yeah, so we did that, and no.
Yeah, so I mean that's been our experience so far. And that's not to say that there isn't something to Bray Road, because I definitely think there is. I mean,
mm-hmm.
you can look at like, Linda's work, which is fantastic.
Linda Godfrey's work.
Right. Well,
right.
I mentioned her before.
Oh, you did? I forgot.
No, it's okay. And it's fantastic. And it really points to, sort of the authenticity of those witnesses' sightings. If anybody hasn't seen the Bray Road Beast documentary by Small Town Monsters, that's great. I mean, Linda's in that. Our friend Jay is in that.
Mm-hmm.
It's really well put together. And so I definitely believe there's something to it. It's just not an area that we have investigated extensively yet. And so sort of the one intersection we had with it turned out to be this hoax, unfortunately.
Okay. That's for anybody that's watching that wants to know, like what you just mentioned as far as the movie was concerned, those are all on YouTube right now.
Oh, did they put them on YouTube?
That one there, no, excuse me. It's on Amazon Prime.
Yes, yeah, should definitely be on Amazon Prime.
I apologize. Don't yell at me. And once again, this is Tobias's book, Lake Michigan Mothman. Great book. Get an opportunity, pick one up. You can get it through the links that are listed in the comments. Emily is a great photographer. She does a lot of these illustrations and everything for the books and a lot of other stuff. Great photographer, great. They're great. They make a great team.
Oh, thank you.
So if you get the opportunity, look them up on Facebook, friend them. And if you have any real interest, join the Fortean Society singular, and it's on Patreon. And you go ahead and get on there, and then you'd be able to go ahead and get in and really find out about all this other stuff too. So it's been a pleasure once again, and we'll see you guys down the road.
Sounds good, Greg. Yeah, always a great time. Thanks for having us.
Probably January or February. You guys have a great night, great weekend.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
You
Thanks
too.
a lot.